Today's topic is the religion of love, and this is the first in a series on the Narada Bhakti Sutras, and which we will have over the next few months interspersed with other talks as well. So that's a basic scripture in Hinduism, Narada's way of divine love. But what is love for God? We have some idea of love in our relationships with our family and friends. We also love earthly things, good food, nice clothes, the latest car or the latest iPhone. Then there is the love of wealth, power, honor. But what is love for God? It's easier said than done. It's an entirely different kind of relationship than with people we know and can see with our senses. Besides, love for God comes with realization. But when we start spiritual life, we're spiritual babies. Our relationship with God is more imagination. It's unfamiliar to us, more like an arranged marriage. So Sri Ramakrishna is the matchmaker, and he comes to our rescue. In Swami Nikhilananda's translation of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, he explained how the Vaishnava school humanizes God. And that is shown in Sri Ramakrishna's early sadhanas. He says God is to be regarded as the devotee's parent, master, friend, child, husband, or sweetheart. Each succeeding relationship representing an intensification of love. Each of those relationships representing an intensification of love. So these bhavas, or attitudes towards God, are known as Shanta, peaceful, Dasya, the servant, Sakya, the friend, Vatsalya, the parent, and Madhur, the beloved. So this sort of superimposition of a human relationship on God can be of great spiritual benefit in developing love for God. Sri Ramakrishna said, "Do you know how a lover of God feels? His attitude is, O God, thou art the master, and I am thy servant. Thou art the mother, and I am thy child. Or again, thou art my father and mother. Thou art the whole, and I am a part." So love for God grows by subjugating and transforming the ego into a companion of God. And this takes spiritual imagination. Sri Ramakrishna tells us, the Bhakta says that since a man cannot easily get rid of this ego, he should let the rascal remain as the servant of God, the devotee of God. But this takes time. In the beginning, it's preparation, a use of imagination. Then later, that imagination deepens in feeling and becomes realization. So we realize God by directing our natural human love towards God. And we all have that capacity to love in a human way. Then, as Sri Ramakrishna explained, the nearer you approach to God, the more you feel his love. As the river approaches the ocean, it increasingly feels the flow of the tides. Note these words, the more you feel his love. The sadhana of bhakti yoga is achieved through practice. Just as any close relationship takes dedication and work, husband and wife, parent to children, friend to friend, all of this takes work. So also developing love for God takes regularity of practice by performing worship, prayer, meditation, and japa, repetition of the name of God. These are preparatory steps called Vaiti Bhakti, according to the scriptures. The obstacles are both external and internal, and there are many. A lack of cooperation or understanding from one's friends and family. Many people go through that. A lack of time. Again, many go through that as well in this busy world. Or a proper place to meditate, etc., etc. And then internal. Our own problems with our human feelings, lust, anger, greed. Human feelings that crop up again and again due to the samskaras we have from past lives and this life. These are tendencies that are created when we perform an act, either mental or physical. Once we do that, that act has a propensity to repeat itself in future activities and life. But Sri Ramakrishna tells that even our feelings can be turned upward. How, we might ask? He says, if you must have desire and greed, then you should desire love of God and be greedy to attain him. If you must be conceited and egotistic, then feel conceited and egotistic, thinking you are the servant of God, the child of God. So that we can do. In this way, we have the determination and perseverance to follow the path of bhakti yoga and serve God until the mind eventually becomes tinged with love, tinged with his love for us. Note, it is not that we love God. We take baby steps, but when we truly feel devotion, one who truly feels that devotion never claims, I am devoted to God. One can only say, how he loves me, how she loves me. Unconditional love. Swami Bhuteshananda, direct disciple of Swami Saradananda and the 12th president of the Ramakrishna order, then explains what happens. The tiger of love swallows lust, anger, jealousy, and so on. In other words, intense love of God removes all obstacles from the path of God realization. Then he goes on, no worldly obstacle can stop the person's growth, as household duties could not stop the gopis from going to meet Sri Krishna. While the gopis were busy with their household work, he described, they heard the sound of Krishna's flute coming from the forest. That call of God was irresistible, and the gopis immediately forgot their work and rushed towards Krishna. The very call lifted their minds from their household duties. Now we think, oh, that's so far advanced. How can I become like the gopis? Well, when you take to spiritual life and you set up a routine, then when you're in the midst of your activities, you remember, oh, it's evening time. It's time to meditate. And by turning our mind away from what we are doing and going to our shrine and engaging in that regularity of practice, that is Sri Krishna's call of the flute. Sri Ramakrishna prescribes certain practices to remove our obstacles to spiritual life. Prayer. What is prayer? It's conversation with God. We don't have to pray in a certain way, kneeling with palms together. We can pray throughout the day. A conversation with God. We may not always know if we're meditating, but we certainly know when we're praying. When asked if God listens to our prayer, Sri Ramakrishna replied, I can assure you of that 100 times, but the prayer must be genuine and earnest. He goes on, through earnest prayer, one receives the grace of God and realizes Him. My teacher used to say, it does work, my child. It does work. Next, Sri Ramakrishna prescribed the company of the holy, which you all are doing here, even though you've missed an hour of sleep. It's very inspiring. By keeping company of like-minded aspirants, one's spiritual samskaras are deepened and fortified. Spiritual friendships also come to your rescue when we're undergoing challenges in life. And I've seen this in our center when young people come and they're struggling. They're struggling with their jobs, they're struggling with their married life. And they make friends with the elders in our center. And when I'm away, they go and meet with these devotees, and the elder devotees help them in their spiritual struggles. So this is satsang, this is holy company. And that's why in our centers, many of our centers, we serve prasad after our spiritual programs in order to enable in that space and time for spiritual connections and friendships to take place, for spiritual samskaras to be awakened and strengthened in those devotees. And when those devotees move away, they write back and say, oh, Mataji, how I miss the center, how I miss the people. You see. So such songs are what grow a spiritual family, a family that sustains us through the ups and downs of life. People here, we're making connections, we're making friendships, and those friendships hold us to the family of Sri Ramakrishna. And third, Sri Ramakrishna often suggested the devotees to periodically go into solitude and meditate on the goal of life. And that's a little difficult in today's hectic world, but there are some who can take time off, and instead of going, to Hawaii or this place or that place, they go into spiritual sadhana. Sri Ramakrishna said, it is extremely difficult to realize God while leading a worldly life. How can a typhoid patient be cured if he is kept in a room where tamarind, pickle, and jars of water are kept? Therefore, one should go into solitude now and then to practice spiritual discipline. When the trunk of a tree becomes thick and strong, an elephant can be tied to it, but a young sapling is eaten by cattle. So these wonderful examples stay with us. So those times establish strong samskaras in the mind that revitalize our spiritual life so we can move about in the world like the mudfish that Sri Ramakrishna described. He said, live in the world as a mudfish lives in the mud. Now, I don't know what a mudfish is, but those of you from India probably do. One develops love of God by going away from the world into solitude, the master said, and meditating on God, now and then, and meditating on God, and that one can live in the world unattached. The mud is there, and the fish has to live in it, but its body is not stained by the mud. Such a man can lead the life of a householder in a spirit of detachment. And this we have seen. So there's no high and low in spiritual life. There are two paths, that of the monastic and that of the lay devotee, and both are wonderful. The Narada Bhakti Sutras is a simple text on devotion that contains only 84 verses. The sage Narada is considered the author, but it's difficult to pinpoint who Narada was. His name is first mentioned in the Chandogya Upanishad, as after having studied all branches of learning, he approached the sage Sanat Kumar to teach him the knowledge of the self in order to overcome all sorrow. Next, we discover Narada in the Srimad Bhagavatam as an illumined soul who approached the sage Vyasa to write the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then Narada shared his past history. Let me tell you of my past incarnation and of how I came to find this divine freedom and peace which I have. My mother was a servant in a retreat where great sages lived. And I was reared in close association with them, and I too served them. While I was living in the society of these holy men, my heart was purified. This is the value of holy company. Holy company and the grace of the Guru accelerate our path to God realization. The study of the scriptures can take us only so far. But even then, our scriptures should also be treated as holy company. Swami Vivekananda explained, to quicken the spirit, that impulse must come from an other soul. That soul from which this impulse comes is called the Guru, the teacher. And the soul to which the impulse is conveyed is called the disciple, the student. In order to convey this impulse in the first place, the master continues, the soul from which it comes must possess the power of transmitting it, as it were, to another. And in the second place, the object to which it is transmitted must be fit to receive it. The seed must be a living seed. It can't be taken off the internet. And it can't be, it can't come from, a request for big money. There are so many gurus today who want to soak those who come to them with a small fortune. That's not genuine guru to disciple transmission. And so we, as the aspirant, Vivekananda explains, and the field must be ready plowed. And when both these conditions are fulfilled, a wonderful growth of religion takes place. And we see this, it's inspiring to see in the devotees after they become initiated and to see how their quest for spiritual life deepens and the regularity of their practice and how their character is transformed. Yes, it's palpable. Narada continued, while I was thus living in the society of these holy men, my heart was purified. One day, one of the sages, because of his deep love for me, initiated me into the sacred mysteries of wisdom. The veil of ignorance was removed from me, and I knew my real self, a higher self, as divine. Narada continued, then I learned this lesson, that the greatest remedy for all the ills of life, physical or mental, is to surrender the fruits of karmas, all of our works, to the Lord. That's karma yoga. Karma places us in bondage, Narada tells us. But by resigning our karmas to the Lord, we are freed. Work which we perform as service to the Lord, he says, creates love and devotion in us. This love and devotion in turn brings wisdom. And at last, guided by this wisdom, we surrender ourselves to the Lord of love and meditate upon him. Thus it is that I attain to wisdom and love, he shared. So thus we see that bhakti yoga, this path of divine love, brings love and wisdom. The two go together, devotion and knowledge. And all the four yogas into our spiritual life. Karma yoga, selfless action. Raja yoga, control of the mind and meditation. And jnana yoga, union with the Supreme Self. Yes, bhakti yoga leads to jnana yoga, which leads to the ultimate reality. Narada continued his story, how he lived with stages until his mother died. Then he left the hermitage to wander in solitude and finally entered a forest and sat in meditation under a tree. He shared, gradually, as my inner vision became clear, I saw the benign Lord of love seated in the sanctuary of my heart. I was overwhelmed with inexpressible joy, and I could no longer think of myself as separate from God, and I had discovered my identity with him. But when Narada returned to normal consciousness, he found, try as he might, he could not re-enter that divine state of consciousness. What to do? Despairing, he heard the Lord's consoling voice then. Those whose desires are not quenched cannot see me, the voice said. But because of your devotion to me, I bestowed the experience to you once. He went on, saints who are devoted to me gradually give up all desires. Live in the company of the holy, attend upon them, and fix your mind firmly on me. Thus, you will ultimately realize your unity with me. So Narada eventually gave up his body and became united with the Lord for a whole cycle of time. Then, as he shared, I was sent forth into this world where I am now living a life of purity and continence. I can wander about everywhere. I am in every loka through the grace of the Lord. Wherever I go, I play on my veena and sing the praises of the Lord. And the Lord of love is ever manifest in my heart. Those who hear my songs find peace and freedom. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that Narada was an ever-free soul. An ever-free soul is called an Ishvarakoti, and we find 6 such Ishvarakotis in the Ramakrishna incarnation. Vivekananda being one, Brahmananda, Premananda, Yogananda, Niranjanananda, Purna, etc. And they are born again and again for the welfare of humankind. And in this age, when our life depends on food, Sri Ramakrishna explains the path of devotion prescribed by Narada is the best and most fruitful sadhana. So in undertaking this scripture, we as spiritual aspirants must have a clear objective. What is our goal? Have we asked ourselves, what is our goal? Mere knowledge of the scriptures? God realization? The direct experience of God is the only thing that can fully satisfy us. We cannot quench our thirst by watching others drink from the river of knowledge. We ourselves must drink. Swami Vivekananda explains, obey the scriptures until you are strong enough to do without them. Then go beyond them. Books are not an end-all. Verification is the only proof of religious truth. Each must verify for himself or herself. And no teacher who says, I have seen, but you cannot, is to be trusted. Only that one who says, you can see too. All scriptures, all truths are Vedas in all times, in all countries, because these truths are to be seen, and anyone may discover them. This is the freedom of Vedanta. This is the truth of Vedanta. Swami Brahmananda explained the science of mystic vision. He said, behind this mind of ours, there is a subtle spiritual mind existing in seed form. He's not talking just about himself. He's talking about you. It's existing in seed form. And through the practice of contemplation, he says, prayer and japa, this mind is developed. And with this development, a new vision opens up, and the aspirant realizes many spiritual truths. The ultimate goal is oneness with the Absolute. But the path is steep, and there are many pitfalls along the way. So without the help of an experienced guru, we may imagine that we have attained a spiritual level that we actually have not attained. Swami Brahmananda would encourage his disciples, practice, practice, he would say. Through practice of the spiritual disciplines, the heart will be purified and a new realm will open. You will realize that God alone is real and that everything else is unreal. But when through japa and meditation, a little awakening comes, do not imagine that you have achieved the end. Light, more light, onward, onward, attain God, gain his vision, talk to him. In this connection, Swami Prabhupada, who was my teacher, and disciple of Swami Brahmananda, used to reminisce. Maharaj had a wonderful insight into the character and spiritual growth of individuals. A friend of mine, he said, whom he knew, renounced the world and went to Rishikesh to practice austerities. Prabhupada continued, he would not accept the guidance of any guru. After a few months' practice, he wrote to me saying that he had attained samadhi. At that time, I was with Maharaj at Kankal, meaning Brahmananda Swami, and I told him the substance of my friend's letter. Why? Exclaimed Maharaj. I saw him about 10 days ago. I looked into his eyes. He has not had samadhi. No doubt he has had some kind of mystic vision, the vision of light perhaps, and he mistakes that for samadhi. An aspirant is often led astray like that, Maharaj continued, when he has no guru to advise him. Maharaj went on, samadhi. Is it an easy matter to attain samadhi? We saw Swamiji and samadhi, meaning Nirvikalpa samadhi, only a few times. Sri Ramakrishna alone we saw in samadhi many times, each day and night. There are two levels of samadhi, savikalpa samadhi, where one becomes absorbed in the personal form of God, which may be God with qualities, which veers then on the impersonal, which is completely transcendent, the highest state of experience. So why God vision? What happens to us then? The Mundaka Upanishad makes that clear. It states, the knot of the heart, all those knots which bind us to this world, which is ignorance, is loosed, all doubts are dissolved, all evil effects of deeds are destroyed, when he who is both personal and impersonal is realized. So now we come to Sutra 1 of the Narada Bhakti Sutras. Narada explains, Atato bhaktim vyakyasyamaha. Now therefore we shall teach bhakti, or the religion of love. So what does the word now mean? What does it signify? The recipients of the teachings in this scripture have already gone through a period of spiritual seeking and of sadhana. And most of you have done this. And even if you haven't, unconsciously you have gone through a period of sadhana in your life, of experiences where you have come to this stage where you want to hear the scriptures, the truths. The student is a spiritual aspirant, as we all are. Everyone here and listening on Zoom, we want to know the secret of attaining love for God. Not everyone feels the need for spiritual life, nor is everyone qualified. Sri Ramakrishna explained, one cannot see God if one has even the slightest trace of worldliness. Matchsticks, if damp, won't strike fire, though you rub 1,000 of them against the matchbox. You only waste a heap of sticks. The mind soaked in worldliness is such a damp matchstick. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says there are 4 types of people who seek God. What are they? The world weary, who desperately seek a way out of their suffering, or have unfulfilled desires that they could never attain. Second, the seeker for knowledge, who inquires into the nature of this world. Third, the seeker for happiness. And fourth, those with spiritual discrimination who realize worldly pursuits as vain and empty. See? So that we can ask ourselves, who am I? Which one am I? The seeker for happiness strikes home for many of us. We see this character trait depicted in the life of Dhruva. This young 5-year-old Dhruva, son of the king Uttanapata, was rejected by his stepmother, Suruchi. The only king's son worthy to inherit the throne must be born of me, she berated Dhruva. Therefore, if you desire to rule this kingdom, you must spend this life practicing austerities so you can become my son in your next life. Dhruva sobbed and ran to his birth mother, Suniti, who consoled him. The only real truth that Suruchi spoke was that everything is possible through sincere yearning, austerities, and the grace of God. He alone can remove all suffering and fulfill all desires. So Dhruva's longing for God was awakened, and he went in search of a guru, Narada, and ultimately Dhruva attained the vision of God. The Lord spoke to him, Dhruva, since you desire to be a king, Now you shall rule your father's kingdom for many years. But Dhruva now considered such a goal trifling compared to spiritual life. See the transformation. However, obeying the Lord's command, he returned to his father's kingdom and was eventually placed on the throne. But after some time, Dhruva's subjects permitted him to go into solitude and spend the remainder of his days in contemplation and meditation. Sri Krishna explains that all four ways, that of the world-weary, seekers for knowledge or happiness, and those with spiritual discrimination, are noble because they all eventually lead us to a God-centered life. So in this first verse, now therefore we shall teach bhakti, or the religion of love. What then did Narada mean by the word therefore? Because, as Sri Ramakrishna explained, he who seeks to find God will surely find him. So through love, one is led directly to God, the divine self in all. Sri Ramakrishna used to sing, "Dwell, O mind, within yourself. Enter no other's home. If you but seek there, you will find all you are searching for. God, the true philosopher's stone who answers every prayer, lies hidden deep within your heart, the richest gem of all." That teaching that the self is within strikes newcomers so completely, it's irresistible. We don't preach you are sinners, we preach you are the divine. Our job is to unfold that divinity, that is all. Swami Bhuteshananda in his sutra commentary explains there are 4 points implied in this first aphorism. What is the subject matter to be taught? The path of bhakti, devotion to God. To whom is this teaching meant? Is not meant for the merely curious or for those who love to intellectualize. It is meant only for those who desire to learn and wish to mold their lives with these teachings. What is the objective? Supreme devotion, nothing less. What is the relation between the teaching in these sutras and the objective to be attained? Swami Bhuteshananda explained, mere intellectual understanding is not enough. The practice of devotion is given greater importance because devotion is both the way and the goal. Both the way and the goal. Sutra 2. Sattvasmin parama prema rupa. Bhakti is of the nature of supreme love for God. So what is the nature of supreme love? Again, Swami Bhuteshananda. It is not ordinary love, but supreme love. It is supreme in the sense that it is not only quantitatively supreme, but qualitatively also. So what does that mean? Quantitatively, it's an intense love. And qualitatively, the deepest possible love. Sri Ramakrishna said, prema, ecstatic love, is an extremely rare thing. Chaitanya had that love. When one has prema, one forgets all outer things. One forgets the world. One even forgets one's own body, which is so dear to man. Qualitatively, it's not ordinary love we feel for our relations. self-centered. Yes, self-centered. A mother's love is self-centered because it's her child. We hear from parents, my son, my daughter. Huh? So that's possessiveness. Her love is centered around herself. Divine love has no relationship to the small self, possessiveness. A bhakta, a genuine bhakta, knows God does not belong to one individual only, but to everyone. A corollary of possessiveness we find in ordinary love is, as Swami Buddheshananda explains, a mother loves her child not for the sake of her child, but for the sake of herself. And if we analyze it, yes, it's like a little self that has been given birth through our children, whereas divine love is selfless. It's always centered in God. And so you may ask, well, how can I turn that selfishness into divine love? We have wonderful devotees who are very close to our center in Santa Barbara. Everything belonged to Mother. The house they lived in was Mother's house. The car they owned was Mother's. The bank account was Mother's. Everything belonged to Mother. And that is how we can purify our relationship to our children. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Yajnavalkya said to his wife Maitreyi, it is not for the sake of the husband that the husband is dear, but for the sake of the self. It is not for the sake of the wife that the wife is dear, but for the sake of the self. He continued, it is not for the sake of the gods that the gods are worshipped, but for the sake of the self. And again, it is not for the sake of the creatures that the creatures are dear, but for the sake of the self. And that's why we find in our tradition, children are named after gods and goddesses. See? It's a way to associate those beings around us with the Lord. And when you come into a Vedanta center and receive initiation, many ask for a spiritual name. And in turn, that name works on us unconsciously and transforms our behaviors. That name of God. So supreme love is quantitatively and qualitatively together the only love that makes us forget ourselves. So when immersed in divine love, we lose our self-identity. What does that look like? We lose our self-identity? That sounds kind of scary. A beautiful example is given in the life of Rumi. He said, there came one and knocked at the door of the beloved. And a voice answered and said, who is there? And the lover replied, it is I. Go hence, returned the voice. There is no room for thee and me. Then came the lover a second time and knocked. And again the voice demanded, who is there? He answered, it is thou. Enter, said the voice, for I am within. Lastly, supreme love knows no fear. Now we all have fear. So what does that fearlessness look like? Al-Haq means the truth. It's one of the 99 names of Allah, God with attributes. The Sufi Al-Halaj, during his trances, would proclaim, An-Hal-Haq, I am the truth. And so he was tortured. And when put to death for heresy, he never stopped smiling in ecstasy as he uttered that dictum. So spiritual realization itself triumphs any act of violence. Now you may say, well, that was Al-Halaj. What about me? Well, it's been my privilege to be at the bedside of many devotees of God. And they have experienced the ups and downs of spiritual life. But at the moment of death, he comes. And we've seen this. The look of bliss, the acceptance and the surrender. Narada describes devotion as of the nature of supreme love for God. Why did he say of the nature of supreme love? Because supreme love cannot be described. Never. A devotee will never make God an instrument for personal gain. Why does a bhakta love God? Because just as we love ourselves, we cannot help it. A real bhakta cannot help himself or herself. But there are very few who attain this level of supreme love. So, we must begin where we are. First, there is Ghoni Bhakti, the path of devotion, which all of us are on. The ways and means that lead us to Prema Bhakti, supreme love for God. And as we practice this path of devotion with faith and commitment, that means regularity of practice, we will gradually ascend to a higher and higher level of love. How does that heightened level of love happen? What does it look like? What does it feel like? We will begin to feel his love for us. Swami Prabhupada explained in his sutra commentary, this intense love that the sage speaks of refers to the love that arises in the heart of a devotee who has the vision of God when he has become intoxicated with divine love. Such love is the same as experiencing God consciousness. Mind you, when we talk about Sat, Chit, Ananda, that bliss is love, which is the same as existence, which is the same as pure consciousness. That divine love transforms us. As Dionysus explained, it is the nature of love to change a man into that which he loves. The German mystic Meister Eckhart, non-dualist, also affirmed, the soul in her hot pursuit of God becomes absorbed in him, and she herself is reduced to naught, just as the sun will swallow up and put out the dawn. Some there are so simple to think of God as if he dwelt there and of themselves as being here. It is not so. God and I are one. Love does this. It binds us into oneness. Sri Ramakrishna explained the transformative effect of divine love in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. You partake of the nature of him on whom you meditate. By worshiping Shiva, you acquire the nature of Shiva. This we see exemplified in the divine play of the gopis' love for Sri Krishna. Lost in their all-consuming love for Sri Krishna, they became one with him. That is to say, they each became Krishnas. Sri Ramakrishna explained, as fire is kindled when you rub two pieces of wood together, so God can be seen in man if you have intense devotion. When one is intoxicated with prema, one sees God in all beings. The gopis saw Krishna in everything. To them, the whole world was filled with Krishna. They said that they themselves were Krishna. Imagine. They were then in a God-intoxicated state. Looking at the trees, they said, these are hermits absorbed in meditation on Krishna. Looking at the grass, they said, the hair of the earth is standing on end at the touch of Krishna. So how is it possible? We may wonder. There are two stages of spiritual experience: Savikalpa Samadhi and Nirvikalpa Samadhi. In Savikalpa Samadhi, the lower Samadhi, one receives a vision of the chosen ideal along with a feeling of inexpressible bliss. But there is still a sense of being separate from God. But in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, there is complete union with God. Love, lover, and the beloved become one. As Swami Prabhavananda explained, God is experienced as impersonal, immanent, and transcendent. Intense love, prema, refers to this experience. Sri Ramakrishna defines prema as the intense love for God that makes one forget the world and forget even his own body. That is, rise above physical consciousness. This intense love is a transcendental experience of inexpressible bliss in which the ego is completely lost. That is the goal of this way of divine love. But if our vessel is not strong or large enough to hold such an experience, even one drop of divine love is enough to change our life, to make us feel blessed, and to be a blessing to others. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.